Gear Tasting Radio is brought to you by Imminent Threat Solutions. ITS provides knowledge that empowers individuals with indispensable skill sets to explore the world and prevail against all threats. Right now, as a special thank you for all podcast listeners, we're offering 10% off in the ITS store. Simply use the code GTR to save 10% at store.itstactical.com. Welcome to Gear Tasting Radio, where we offer an in-depth look into the usage and philosophy behind the equipment in our lives. I am joined by Rob Henderson today.
Hello.
And I'm Brian Black. Today we are going to talk about evacuation. That's our topic today, and not, you know what I mean.
Not that kind of evacuation.
The kind where there's an emergency, not that kind of emergency. I'm sorry.
And you have to leave.
Yeah. Anyway, natural disaster. That's what I'm getting at, right? So this kind of got sparked, and I guess if you want to talk about it, since you kind of took the lead on this one from the article that we published.
Yeah, we published an article last week on a contributor of ours had reached out after listening to one of our episodes on prepping and said, hey, can I throw you my story and kind of some stuff that I've done? And it was about a flood that happened in Colorado in 2013 that had affected areas that were really high in elevation, like 7,900 feet of elevation.
Yeah.
People that had never considered that they would flood. And it like wiped out homes and neighborhoods, and he's basically, heavy rains are coming in. He goes to sleep. 3 o'clock in the morning, he gets a knock on the door. It's a fireman. The fireman says, you have 5 to 10 minutes to get stuff. We're taking you out. You have to leave. And it's, floodwaters are rising. So it was everything he was able to grab and the lessons learned from that.
Yeah. And by the way, leave your house unlocked.
Yeah, that was the biggest thing. So that was, this article kind of started me thinking down the, what have I prepped for, which is basically I'm going to lock my door and stay inside my house. But what if that's not an option?
Yeah. Well, and, one of the things that, I like to say is you are more likely to have to bug in than bug out, if that's truly what you call it. And I think we're all, at least I know, I'm prepared for long-term.
Sure.
I mean, not super long-term, but we always think we're ready, but we're never ready,
right.
That's just kind of that old adage. But I think that none of us are truly prepared. I mean, maybe there's some of us out there, but I think the majority of us are not prepared for a knock on the door at 3 a.m. and saying you have 10 minutes to get anything that you value.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting from the standpoint of not only having to grab things in particular, but really, from a continuity of life type of thing. I mean, you got to think that, hey, everything that was in your house could be gone.
Yeah.
You got to grab whatever you can. I mean, it really comes down to also the, I'm always deathly afraid of fire. Like, that's a big thing for me. Like, if, I woke up in the middle of the night and there was a fire, it's almost the same thing.
Sure.
Whereas, you've got a little time to make sure what's truly important leaves with you.
Yep.
More so than a fire, but it's really almost the same thing.
Yeah.
So that guy had to prepare to, like you said, lose absolutely everything.
Yep.
So,
well, and he talked about they grabbed clothes and stuff, and then as he went on, it turned out to be not everything he would need. And one of the biggest things that stuck out to me is they had a dog, and when they got to the emergency shelter that had been set up, they said, "Hey, no dogs."
Yeah.
So it's like, well, what do you do now?
Yeah.
It's like, hey, it's been nice, buddy. Like, no, you got to find something to do with your dog. So, so I started putting together like a bag with all that stuff, and just kind of going down what I wouldn't be able to replace. And that's what led me to, a lot of people had talked about documents and things like that. So I've got like copies, physical and electronic now, just to kind of help speed the process along. I know I've been to like, anytime you go to the DMV, the more paperwork you have, the better to back up your case. So if you did come back, like you said, fire, you can have a fire-resistant safe. That's great, but it's resistant only for a certain amount of time.
Right.
So, I mean, there's a good chance that you're going to lose that too.
They call it proof, but it's really not proof per se.
Fire gets hot.
Yeah.
So, and I've also seen a lot of times where floods can cause fire or earthquakes can cause fire. So you might be getting like a double whammy. But it was just kind of interesting to think about that. So I kind of changed up the bags that I normally had packed to include more stuff. One of the things that I got was cash, because I started thinking about, if the town is affected, your credit card machines are out because your power's gone. So cash is going to be huge to like pay for food or just anything in general.
That's a great point.
And so I hadn't really kept cash in a bag because I'm always afraid of leaving it in the vehicle. But if someone's going to break into your car, they're going to take it anyway. But The other thing that was big for me was radios.
Yeah.
And we've been talking about ham radio for, I don't know, weeks and months.
We've beat it to death lately.
But one of the things that I've done is put extra radios in my bag. And a lot of people will say, like, well, they have to be ham licensed. But there's actually a provision in the amateur radio stats that if there's a loss of life or loss of property situation, anybody can operate on a ham frequency.
Absolutely.
So having pass-out radios, that would be super
And that's
great.
probably one of the biggest things we neglected probably to talk about in our ham discussions.
True. Oh, that's true.
Because I don't think we brought that up.
I don't think we did either.
And that's one of the, we talked about it's for emergency communications, but really in a true emergency, you're able to operate on those frequencies. So
that's a good call. So if you don't feel like getting ham licensed, you may want to pick up a transceiver, and obviously you don't want to willfully neglect the FCC's rules, but at the same time, you tune in a repeater frequency and that could be your backup communication.
Yeah.
That was one of the things he mentioned in the article was the only communications that were up were ham radios after a couple days.
Yeah.
And so that was really cool to see those guys be able to coordinate that.
Yeah, that was eye-opening too in that article.
And I mean, those little Baofeng radios are like $25.
Yeah.
There's no reason you couldn't have 3 or 4 of those just camped out in a bag. But the other thing I took a look at was food. And so I've replaced, I was doing MREs, I was doing Mountain House, so I've replaced it with ration blocks. I got them on Amazon. They were like $16.99.
Have you actually eaten one?
Not yet. I'm going to taste it, and I'm going to test it. But it ends up being one of those, like, you just need the calories.
Yeah.
But each brick is 3,600 calories, which is like a huge amount of calories. So I'll see. I'm going to taste one. We'll see how it goes. It might be absolutely disgusting. But I think after a couple days without food, you'll...
I imagine the lambus bread from...
Yeah. It's exactly what I think it's going to be. I think it's going to be like a very oily cookie.
Oh, look, more lambus bread. Yeah.
That is great. Yeah.
Yeah. That's exactly what I think of when I think of stuff like that. It can even be the same way with the same MRE that you have to eat over and over again or something like that.
It might not be fun.
Yeah.
But it'll keep you alive.
No, I mean, it's a really good point, and it's something to absolutely consider in your preparation stuff. And, I know that a lot of people don't prepare for stuff like that because the likelihood of that happening to them is very low in terms of, other methods like a fire or
statistically
a car crash or something like that. And I get it, but at the same time, it never hurts to have that kind of stuff prepared because there could be multiple reasons why you have to evacuate your house. It may not be a flood. It may not be a fire. It may just be, we had a gas leak and you can't get back to your house for 5 days. And gas leaks are serious. I mean, that's a big deal. And they will evacuate neighborhoods because of gas leaks. And you might not think that would ever happen, but it really does happen quite a bit.
Yeah.
Especially in areas that are prone to sinkholes and things like that. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and so the other thing that's helped me is I've got designated spaces for stuff now. So I've tried to cut down on the thinking process because I know, like, at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm super groggy. I don't have time to, like, all right, what do I need? What do I need?
Yeah.
And he said between 5 to 10 minutes was kind of their window. So it's like, what can you gather? And at that point, it's just grab this bag.
Yeah.
And I've also got a big camping tote that I normally take my camping stuff in. But I figured having a tent, sleeping bags, and stuff like that, worst case scenario, you could at least camp somewhere, versus like a shelter.
Well, one thing I also found interesting that they were telling that guy, the firefighters, like, take what you can carry. It's not, it was like hey, grab a backpack and throw it on your back, not necessarily like not to trash talk your tote.
No,
but it's like,
not at all.
Who knows if they would see that as something that could be taken or whether they're like, oh, yeah, we can't take that.
Right, and it's up to them. And so that's why I kind of have, like, in my mind, it would be putting it in the vehicle and driving it off. But if it's already too far gone, like this guy was, you couldn't drive the vehicle. They wouldn't let you. But I don't know. I also fight back and forth with, like, oh, I'm going to try it.
Yeah. And he did. Another great point that he brought up in an article was that is keeping stuff up high. So he had that flooding and, everything that was on the bottom shelf anywhere in the house was just completely ruined. So a lot of their keepsakes and things they couldn't replace were on bottom shelves. And that was kind of eye-opening as well. Yeah. And, I kept thinking about, okay, well, I've got stuff stored and it is low down and, on the floor too. I mean, we're lucky too in our neighborhood. We're in a, more elevated position in the neighborhood, but still, there is a creek near us and things like that, and who knows what could happen.
Well, and I don't know about you, but I get the emergency alerts on my phone, And like flash flood is the first one that I'm just like dismiss. But probably maybe start paying a little more attention to that, going forward.
I'm certainly guilty of that too.
Yeah. But it is interesting because some of the stuff that you lose, like you said, you might not get back. And so it's tough to kind of like, in the moment you want to take everything. You want to grab guitars and computers and all this kind of stuff, but it comes down to like, what do you actually need to survive, but also like, what are your big overarching things that you could never replace? Maybe if you have like family jewelry or something like that.
And that's really the best place to start. Like if I had to recommend, a place to start to somebody for that type of thing, before you go out and buy the fancy equipment or the survival stuff or anything like that, even just simply taking an inventory of your house is huge. And most people never do that.
Yep.
And nowadays, with everybody that has a video camera on their phone, you could literally walk around your house and document the whole thing, which is amazing for insurance purposes.
Oh, yeah.
That, if you had to prove something in a fire or otherwise, having a video documentation of everything in your house, especially the valuables, would be massive.
Great idea.
And another is, cataloging serial numbers from all your expensive items, whether those are firearms or whether that's even the TV, things like that. Most people don't have any of that kind of information. And then, like we were talking about, just going through your house and looking at stuff with that eye of, hey, could I replace this if it, burned up in a fire, or I could never have it again? Is this something I could get again? No. Yes, no. Okay, well, if no, maybe consider the space requirements of that item, and is it something that you could take in an emergency? And if not, is there an alternative? So
how can you safeguard it?
Right.
Something I saw that, I don't know, I didn't see it on Pinterest, but it's a very Pinteresty type idea, and it's a laminated inventory card of what's in your bag.
Oh yeah, that's a great idea.
And if you take something out, you cross it off with a dry erase marker. Then when you put it back, you can wipe it off. So you can look at a list and immediately know if everything's in your bag.
Yeah.
Obviously, that takes some discipline to not just take things out willy-nilly. But, anything that you can do to prep for the times when you're, like we've talked about GTD and stuff, and one of the big tenets is like doing your brain work when your brain's capable of doing it. So when you're brain dead, you can just push buttons.
Yep.
Versus like having to, at 3 o'clock in the morning, be like, okay, well now I have to inventory my house.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's a lot of what that is too. And that's why I've really kind of gotten those systems down to where I have a combo between Evernote and my OmniFocus program, which is run off of a GTD system. So I have my kind of checklist items in Evernote, and I can go to those lists and check something off if I do take it out or it's not there. And then I've got the consumables or the stuff that expires and that needs regular replacement or even checks, because maybe the batteries aren't expired, but I just want to make sure everything's fine, nothing's leaked, which I have moved to all lithium batteries, so I don't have to do much of that anymore.
But still a good idea.
But still, And I have all those things on recurring, lists.
And that's through OmniFocus?
Within OmniFocus.
See, that's perfect because it can track those dates.
Yep. So it can pop up, and say, hey, by the way, you need to check this today.
Yeah.
So
that's great.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm not 100% with that, but I'm probably like 85% of what I need to be tracking with that. So yeah. But yeah, that's a great place to start is just looking at stuff with that eye. It's kind of what we talked about with backpacking too. It's like you look at stuff when you come back from a trip and say, did I use it? Did I not use it? Do I need to take it because I can't live without it? It's kind of that method too.
Yeah. So. And it comes down to like what's replaceable versus what's not. One of the other things that I thought was great was he mentioned having to cover about a half a mile. Now, he got the fire department to drive him that half a mile, but if he hadn't, in the rain, he would have been having to cover that kind of distance. So when I was looking at clothing selections, it's like, what's the worst thing that could happen? I'm going to take that kind of clothing, and then it'll just be overkill. So, like, I'm putting on boots. You know, I'm wearing a rain shell and that kind of stuff just in case. Because you might have to cover a good couple miles, and that would suck.
And even, it's something I heard a long time ago. I can't remember where I heard this, but I still don't have a place to do this yet because I don't have really a shed in the backyard or anything. But I remember somebody saying, take a 5-gallon bucket and put a bunch of clothing and items like that in it and store it, outside of your house, because if there's a fire, you have to escape your house suddenly, in the middle of the night, it's raining or something like that. Now you basically have the clothes on your back, and at least that gives you something somewhere to grab.
That's a great point.
because it might be like that too. I mean,
Sure.
we talk in this episode about the whole 5-10 minutes,
Right.
grab your stuff and go. It could just be, hey, I'm going to smash a window and get out of my house right now because there's literally smoke coming in under my door or something like that. So,
and that's a great point, is to have it. Maybe that's that pre-planning, putting it out there. And
it's almost like a cache,
Yeah, exactly. And that's the other thing, is I think people, when you say cache, people think like, oh, well, that's kind of like paranoia, end of the world type stuff. But it doesn't have to be. It could be fire, earthquake, the stuff you're more likely to run into. It would help, in the end of the world scenario. But at the same time, like, if you just have clothes, you're in your underwear because that's what you sleep in.
Well, I mean, even me, I don't have that, but at least I have clothing in my vehicle.
Right.
So, and I don't park in the garage. So it's, I could still technically hope to get to that.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, and hopefully, with 4-wheel drive, you can get maybe a little further. It's kind of an all-encompassing package of preparation for that kind of stuff. But it was also interesting because I think there are a lot of people that, and we've talked about this with bug out bags and stuff before, of like not considering weight. Because like I was so tempted as I was getting all this stuff together to like overload. And you got to keep it as light as you can still, because you may have to cover distance. I mean, 60 pounds is not going to go with you for very long before you start stripping and throwing stuff out.
Yeah, it's very true. Yeah, I know that 60 pounds would be a nightmare.
Yeah, because what was your total weight at Mammoth? It's like 50 with the gun?
Yeah, well, that was the first year?
Yeah.
First year, yeah. And I considerably cut that down for the second year. But, yeah, because this coming up, it'll be my third doing it. So this last year, I think I was at 42 with the gun, or 41
and that's still pretty
with the gun.
rough.
Yeah, and that's still a beat down.
Yeah.
But, I was consuming food, so that was lightening the load a little bit and things like that. I was shooting ammo, which was lightening the load. So, if there are consumable type items in your bag, that is a calculation you can kind of look forward to as well, is that as my time goes on with this, I'm going to be eating stuff or putting on a layer of clothes or,
Looking forward to getting that stuff out of your pack.
Right. Yeah, or drinking the water you have in there, so on and so forth. So.
Well, and I noticed that he had said in his article, too, that he and his wife shared a pack. So I think that's a great opportunity to kind of split that up, have 2 packs. If you got kids, get them packs. They're little weight-carrying machines. Not too much.
Even my dog has a pack.
Yeah,
exactly.
exactly.
I don't carry his shit.
Yeah, and so, like, you have people that are able to carry stuff. And, that's one of the things I had envisioned with the tote, was that if I was able to take it, cool. If not, we'll just go with the backpacks or whatever we've got.
There's a really good book I've been trying to remember the name of that's very much along the lines of what we're talking about. I think it's called When All Hell Breaks Loose, or When Hell Breaks Loose, or something like that. It's written by, he's at Nestor? Tony, man, I'm going to mess up his last name. Tony Nestor, I think is his name. He's out of Arizona. I met him at Overland Expo a long time ago, and I had read his book probably 3 or 4 years ago. This is probably one of the first books I read when I started ITS, but he has some great information on stuff just like that. That's where I think I picked up the tidbit about having that extra bag of dog food all the time, so I can just grab a bag of dog food if I had to. And so that's how I've mentioned that before, that I cycle out dog food. So there's always a brand new bag that hasn't been opened sitting in my pantry. So things like that. And he gave me a few new ways to look at things along those lines too. And that's a great book. I'm trying to think of some other resources that we could talk about.
Well, that's why it was so great to hear from a contributor,
sure,
or from a reader,
absolutely,
to just say, like, here's my experience. So, if you guys have ideas and stuff, definitely leave them, because that's where we got started anyway. And you can we're always learning. It's not, and nobody's set in stone or anything like that. But there's another, there's an article on ITS, which is it's the 3-minute rule, I think we have, so we can link to that. And we've talked about that before. We did an episode on 3 minutes without air, or the rule of threes, or something like that. Yeah. And that kind of all ties in, so we can link that too. And then we have a couple others of like evacuation type, or like gotta go right now, which is kind of eye-opening, like you said, for this whole thing. But yeah.
There's a new product that it's a little bit along these lines, because we're talking about fire and stuff, but there's a new product I was looking at. I'm kind of starting to get into the whole smoke hood thing. Yeah. And I looked at those before a long time ago. This was probably in the early days of ITS too, right? Around 2010 or something. And there's a couple of different variations of that, because I'm always thinking like, hey, one of the big problems with smoke is carbon monoxide and things like that. So wearing some type of escape hood is great, but you're still dealing with either a filter system taking in that air still, or you're dealing with a limited amount of air that's in the hood, to get you out. So the thing that I had seen is actually a unit. And actually, somebody posted it on the muster forum.
I think I know exactly what you're talking about.
So it's a self-contained unit that actually has its own air source. But they're still, and they're not crazy, because I've seen some of those type of smoke hoods that run into like the $400 and $500.
I was going to say, it just looked expensive.
Yeah. It was one that like the Secret Service had used or something like that.
For like a vehicle fire or something.
Yeah. So I'm starting to kind of investigate that. And I saw some used ones on eBay, and how the whole expiration thing goes. It's like you're hesitant to get into expired items, but it's also, expiration dates are just kind of a made up date sometimes too. So
I find with a lot of that type of equipment, especially when you get into like gas masks and stuff, you're kind of at the whim, because there's not really a good way to test a gas mask. So like you just hope it works.
Well, I mean, even a smoke hood, I mean, you could,
I guess you could start a fire.
Build a fire and put your face in it.
There's not really probably a good way to test that. But that's a great point, though, because you can, I think smoke inhalation is probably the biggest cause of death in a house fire.
Absolutely.
But you could gain yourself a little extra time to gather stuff, or just to get out, if the fire's gone too rapidly. But that, going back to the preparedness thing, this all comes down to like you should be checking your smoke detectors once a year. Yeah. You should have a carbon monoxide detector, all that kind of stuff. Twice a year?
I check mine twice a year. I actually replace batteries twice a year.
Oh, that's a good
call. Every time I change the clocks, that's my indicator. So
that's a good plan.
Yeah, I heard that a long time ago, and it's always just really stuck with me. So that's actually something that's set up on my OmniFocus too.
Oh, that's cool.
That I track the smoke detector checks.
That's a good idea.
So yeah.
And then making sure you have enough, because I know a lot of houses just have one smoke detector.
No, absolutely.
You gotta.
Yeah, and I make myself change the batteries too. So even if they don't need it, I change them.
It's just a battery.
It's an expense, and that gets to be a little bit, but I buy 9 volts on Amazon.
And like $2 a piece.
I just said that thing about lithiums, and I don't use 9-volt lithiums in my smoke detectors. But anyway, and most other devices I use lithiums.
Especially stuff you're carrying.
Yeah, when I'm replacing them twice a year, I'm not going to use lithiums because they're too damn expensive. But anyway,
another idea I'd seen is having a handheld GPS, one that you can download maps to, so that way you can have maybe a little more in-depth detail on your maps. In case you need to navigate. But I think most of it is you're going to be in your town. You probably know where you are. You're not moving huge distances.
Yeah, and that's another big reason why I keep a road atlas in my truck.
Yeah.
So I don't depend on Google Maps to get me around. Because there was a time in my life when I used to take a cross-country trip, and all I had was a road atlas, believe it or not. I'm still young enough to whatever.
Yeah.
I'm getting old
enough to know it.
But yeah, I mean, there was a time when I couldn't just pull up a Google map and figure out how to get to California. I literally used a road atlas, which is an invaluable skill in itself. And I actually have an article on that on ITS that I wrote, but that's something I'd very much recommend. Especially if you're thinking about things along the lines of preparedness like this, is just even taking a little bit to learn how to read a road atlas, which is not as easy as you think it is. If you're trying to figure out distance and things like that too. I mean, sure, exits are marked and things like that, but it's nice to know how to read, the mileage between 2 points and then add things up and, anyway.
Especially if you're covering it on foot.
Yeah.
That would be good to know to gauge distances and know when or how long it's going to take you to go that distance.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and, the other one thing I wanted to mention also, it's kind of a last thing with the article of the guy from Colorado that had that emergency, is that, you mentioned him encountering the problem where he couldn't bring his dog into the shelter.
Yeah.
And that's when he called a good friend of his, and his good friend was able to come pick him up and the dog, and they were able to stay there. And that's really kind of a hint that your support network really needs to be strong too. Is that
absolutely.
Not only that people can depend on you, but you can depend on other people if an emergency like that happens. So.
Well, and having a list of phone numbers.
Yeah.
Because I've lost my cell phone before and tried to call a friend to get me. And I know I knew like my grandma's phone number,
And I know we're all guilty of that nowadays.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know quite a few phone numbers still, but yeah.
You end up calling an old high school friend because
that's what I'm talking about.
You can remember.
I still remember old friends' phone numbers, believe it or not.
Yeah.
It's pretty funny. But yeah, that's an important point too, is to
have that contact info.
Yeah, it's to not only
be that support for other people.
Exactly.
Know that other people can count on you to come help and stuff like that. I think that's what we've talked in the past about, joining communities like CERT and even the ham communities and stuff. That helps to build that support network. But you have to be willing to contribute as well. You can't just be the one that relies on them.
I really need to get into CERT locally in my city, because I did it in Fort Worth, which is a little bit of a ways away from where I live, and I just really wasn't happy with the whole. They're a huge city.
Right.
It's like they don't really have to depend on those kind of people, so it's almost kind of like a dog and pony show a little bit. I mean, the resources were invaluable in terms of the information I learned. It was great information. But in terms of actually, like you said, building that support network and volunteering and doing things, there's really never been any opportunity for that. It's not like they've ever reached out even via email to all those people to say, hey, we're having a alumni event,
or something like that.
We're gonna refresh skills, or there's just never been anything. So, and maybe other cities are not like that. I would hope that other cities are not like that, but I mean, that's
good to build, and like you said, getting on a more local scale. So if you have a smaller town, or if you don't have something set up in your town, maybe you set something up in the town.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right, thanks for listening to Gear Tasting Radio today. Remember to check the episode intel, and we'll put up some articles that we talked about today, along with some resources like the books that we mentioned. And, if you have comments and questions that pertain to this episode, go on to the link that will be on itstactical.com. Leave a comment on there. If you've got an interesting story like that to share, or you've got tips for preparedness like we talked about, head over to itstactical.com and check out the article that involves this Gear Tasting Radio episode, and you'll be able to leave a comment there. And as always, use the pound tag Gear Tasting if you've got some information that you would like to get answered on the show. Questions, information, whatever.
Anything.
Yeah. And don't forget to subscribe if you like what we're doing, and give us a review on iTunes. And we are now on Patreon, so patreon.com/ITSTactical is a way that you can help support the show and allow us to give you back something in return. Thanks again.